As I was preparing for this morning, one of the themes I wanted to explore was the theme on names. And in your supplement you received, I asked you to think of your own name and the history of your name. As everyone aware that in the Jewish tradition, you give names of the ones you love and so forth. And so one of the names I would like to certainly explore, and I will do more throughout the service, but we're just about to approach Unatana Tokef, one of the most stirring of piyutim, which means a poem. And I would like to say that as a cool air and shorter days convey to us nearing a season, and our Jewish psyche certainly records certain melancholy that comes with a beautiful autumn. The summer days are finite, and not only summer days, the fallen leaves whisper softly a worry to us. And there are days that are set for us to contemplate. Certainly this is the time. And big questions are asked at Rosh Hashana. What are you going to do with your one precious short life? Unatana Tokef speaks of that uncertainty. It speaks in a flowery, honest manner of a medieval piyut, or they call it a medieval poem. And the prayer book, which you holding, certainly spend a lot of its pages trying to explain and bring that piyut, that poem, closer to us. And a medieval piyut reads, and you're well familiar with its sensitivity, because it's also have been an inspiration for so much music that you would know. How many pass on, how many shall thrive? Who shall live and who shall die? Whose death is timely and who is not? Who dies by fire and who shall be drowned? In the conventional reading of this prayer, God's name and the image of God is a judge, auditor, grand inquisitor, and above all, a shepherd. So when idea of the shepherd comes into scene, and what is the shepherd means to us, to those of us who are approaching this text from the place of a time traveler. In the ancient world, it was a big deal because of the way people lived. And shepherds were strong, and they understood their flocks, and they knew what to do. So the image of God is the shepherd. And in front of this sovereign shepherd, the book of life is open. And I always think when I give away another box of books from my house, I'm thinking, am I reducing God's library by any chance? God also loves books. And the shepherd, who not only looks and obviously, counts everything we have done and sees the book and what's written in the book, what we have written, but the shepherd examines its flock, and under its rod, we pass through like a sheep. Now, let me just say about the sheep, and should I say, do I know anything about it? Well, I spent a little bit of time in New Zealand and Australia on a sheep farm. So let me just say about the metaphor of a sheep. If we are meant to pass under the flock of the shepherd, we do not pass very agreeably. Sheep are not actually such an agreeable creatures, but the image is that as God watching us, passing through, very carefully examining. What I learned from the sheep farmers is how much they obviously care for their sheep. They examine it. They see if it's had enough to eat, enough water. If it's sick, it has to be isolated from other sheep so it does not infect others. They attend to the sheep during its birth. It's a lot of very hard, loving work that goes into. Now, try to shear it, the animal, that's altogether a different story for a different comments, because they wiggle and they don't like it. So what I want to say that within this poem, within this piyut, the image itself fights with itself. There is an argument within an image. And my teacher, wonderful teacher and a mentor, Sandy Sasso, says the following: what in a way, non-Jewish image. Why? Because we are not sheep. Human beings, and especially Jews, are not so agreeable. We actually don't just walk through life going, okay, so by fire, and so by water, and so by tumor, and so by, and so forth, so on. No, we stand in a line of tradition that asks questions. So this is a Jewish, very Jewish prayer. It's also not very Jewish prayer in its sentiment. And I love when tradition argues with itself. You just have to spend a little bit of time looking for it. Where is Abraham who argues for the Sodom and Gomorrah? Where is Job who says who refuses to take a God's dictate just straightforward? Where is the Levi Yitzchak, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, who stands before God refusing to accept the suffering of the Jewish people? What does Rabbi of Berdichev says to God? God, I did not make children orphaned, and I did not make to take husband from a wife. You did that. So I'm going to make you a deal. You forgive me, and I will forgive you. Our tradition calls even God to the account. Not only does the God sits on a throne of justice and of mercy and of judgment, where Jews also assess. But then, as I am ready and reading this poem with these metaphors of passivity, and I'm ready to strike back or close the book and walk away, either in my soul or actually in a physical sense, get up, stand, and turn, the poem pulls me back. Teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah will help the hardship of the decree path. Prayer, teshuvah, the repentance, examining of who I am, devotion of my heart, and my generosity help the hardship of the decree pass. I have little control of what can happen to me, but I have a lot of control of how I respond to what happens to me. We can be kinder, more forgiving, more generous. We might not be able to make our lives longer, but we can make them better, and we can make other lives better. We can make them less bitter, and we can make them more loving. We find ourselves facing unintended circumstances, confronting situation of our making. Those circumstances are not inherently meaningful, but we can make them meaningful. We can give them purpose. It is up to us to confer significance on time and to bring holiness to the time we have here. I have little control on what happens to me, but I have some control on how I live and how I respond. We're part of an ancient people and a faith that transcends time. You named us after you, God, we say at this piyut, at Unatan Tokef. Israel, one that struggles and asks and wrestles. In other words, we Jewish people are part of something greater that views our short autumn days with meaning and spirit. Rabbi.
And we continue.
So, Lenka, beautiful and soulful, so soulful. So I would like to we're running late and I already know it, and that's the nature of services. So they always take a little bit more than you expected. So let me just get back to the names quickly. I have something to share, and each of us has a name. A poet, Zelda, says her full name is Zelda Schneerson-Mishkovsky. Each of us has a name that Olivia Daniel read so beautiful and given to us by our parents. Each of us has a name given by our statue and our smile and given by what we wear. Each of us has a name given by the stars and given by our neighbors. each of us has a name given by our sins and given by our longings. The poem is quite a bit longer. I'm not dealing with the entire poem. I would like to say that everything, as we know, has a name. What I love about the poem is that it has this meter, each of us has, and then within no time, you begin to actually complete your own words to you become a poet within a story. And you are writing the story with Zelda. And the meter that I love and the precision of the poem that I love. And Zelda builds this poem on the fact that our sages from Ecclesiastes, Rabbi, says that each of us has three names they pronounce. The name given to us by our parents, the name that others gives us, and the name we make for ourselves. And she builds on that teaching. And when I learned with Dr. Sperling, incredible teacher of mine from Hebrew Union College, he said that from the Akkadian, which is spoken in ancient Near East, if you name something as if you created it, as if you hold it, you created it. And therefore, it certainly aligns with the fact that when God creates the world, he names Adam, and then Adam names all the animals. So you have creation within a creation. And most of us are named, and I ask you to examine, most of us are named after your family members, or you take a Hebrew name if you were not given at your birth, and it's loaded with the meaning. We hope when we give name that the best of qualities, curiosity, generosity, love of learning, love of tradition will pass on to the person who will hold the name after the ones you love. And everything has names, and certainly we name God, right? This entity that embodies the world. Our ancestors had plenty name for him. Adonai Melech, we just heard, God who is the sovereign. Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun, God kindness and of mercy. Adonai Roi, God who sees, Hagar calls him. Adonai Tzavaot, God of ministering beings that help to run the world. And our shepherd, I just talked about that. And Avinu Malkeinu, our father, our king. And I would like to add that Rosh Hashana stories are filled with loaded names in our tradition. Now, we most of the time do not spend time looking at them. So I want to take very quickly and look at three names, but two especially first, and that is one is Penina, which has come to us from our Haftarah, from the readings in the book of Samuel. And so quick story is that the man named Elkanah from the mountain of Ephraim had two wives, one called Penina and one called Hannah. And he goes to Shiloh, which is the place in Judean hills, where there's before the established monarchy and before the temple. And that's where they worship. And he makes offerings, and then he gives food to Hannah, and he gives food to Penina. And because Hannah is infertile, she does not have children, but Penina gives birth nearly every year. He gives Hannah a little bit more, and Hannah is bereft beyond the words, and she wants a child, a woman's desire to be fulfilled as a mother. And Penina isn't terrible to her. She's jealous that Elkanah favors Hannah so much, and she taunts her. So she says to Hannah, why don't you bring your children to school? Why aren't they dressed? And she knows that she has no children. Why would you say such a terrible thing? What's fascinating, if the rabbis do not see, just one second, one thing is, sorry, just the dog named Blake just broke out from his confinement and ran through the living room, distracting me. So my apologies. I just asked my son to lock him up again. But Penina is tormenting Hannah. And after this terrible sorrowfulness, Hannah comes to God, and she davens very, 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 very sincerely and with a great passion. Rabbi said, almost like Abraham, and she demands a child, and her wish is fulfilled. Rabbis see Penina's role in a positive light. So why would they do that? Why would they see Penina is that God asked her to taunt Hannah? Well, they say that, rabbis respond, that it's Penina's meanness and determination to make Hannah ask for what she wants. And Hannah in this great midrash says to God, why did you give me this body? Why did you give me the body of a woman if not to create life and sustain life? And she gives birth later on and so forth. But what's fascinating about Rabbi's affection for Penina, who's actually quite mean in reading the plain text, is the fact that it is in her name. Penina in Hebrew means a pearl, right? I'm holding a little pearl necklace, which I rarely think where these pearls come from. Where pearls come from, I've learned a little bit in more details. I mean, I knew, yes, they come from an oyster and they're water pearls and fresh, whatever it is, but you know more than I do. But the fact is that what makes a pearl is that it's an irritant named nacre that gets into the pearl, into the clam, and in order to sort of, deal with it, the layers and layers and layers of a mussel turn into this beautiful little gem. Penina in Hebrew means a gem or a pearl. And who is the nacre in the story? In the Hannah story is Penina. Penina is an irritant. Hannah does not really want the tormentment of Penina, but because of Penina's behavior, actually Hannah grows into this extraordinary woman. So I want to say that in our life, throughout the year, there have been plenty of nacres and plenty of irritants. But what it did produce is treasure. Because we responded in a way that made us beautiful and more beautiful. Last, before the finds that name Yitzhak. Yitzhak is a story we read. It's a sacrifice of Yitzhak. I want to deal with his name for very, very quickly. Yitzhak, which means one who will laugh, is the child of Abraham, second child. It is through his line that we will continue as a Jewish people. The story of Akedah, of offering of Isaac, makes sense and makes no sense. What does that mean? The father is asked a parent to sacrifice, to offer his son on the altar. Which one of us wouldn't take that place ourselves instead of our children? Abraham says nothing. We are left gasped. There are many interpretations. One is the fact that traditionally that Abraham loves God so much he would never say no. Difficult to deal with, not something I can hold on to. The other is we try to put Abraham on a couch. He probably came from a very difficult household, and therefore he treated his son in this way. Since Freud came after Abraham, I will not deal with Freud looking at Abraham, but actually to look and search for another meaning. And I want to say that it was my husband standing at the sink. He was a tall man who would wash dishes, and I remember water splashing all over the kitchen counter and the floor, and the Torah would come through him. In addition to other extraordinary intellectual insight, so easy. And he would say, we can't read it just the way it is. He says that it is within Isaac's name that we understand our Jewish reality. Isaac is the line through which we develop Jewish consciousness, and that throughout our life, throughout Jewish development, we will come close to some very, very profoundly deeply troubling circumstances, and we will leave maybe spiritually affected, maybe physically affected, maybe affected by our physical body, but we will leave, and we will leave with laughter, because there is nothing like the Jewish humor. Yitzhak means the one that will laugh. Our reality is embedded in his name. Nothing like Jewish humor, right? Seinfeld certainly will agree with me. And it's from, Yiddish did not came to me through my parents and my grandparents, but it's not language I know, I could feel it. And so it is from our Jewish people, just some statements. Chacham, sardonic humor, which means wise people, became chocham, which means a fool. We turn it. My grandmother used to say a saying, show me, she would translate it into Russian so I would understand, show me the money and I'll show you where the dog is buried. Or one of my favorite ones from these bearded, Orthodox, devoted Jews who would say, from shtetl, if God lived on earth, his windows would be broken. If God lived on earth, his windows would be broken. How daring. Zelda, the poet, saves her punchline for the end. Each of us has a name given by our love, says Zelda. Each of us has a name given by the sea, given by our longing, and given by our death. At that point, she puts a period in the end, and you cannot add, because after we die, we cannot add to our name. The poem stops, and so are we. And while we're here, it is additional names that we take on that expands the names we have and expands for the better. The meaning of life, says Franz Kafka, is the fact that it ends. But we have a power. We have a power to expand the name. I spent some time speaking to David Friendly, who remembers clearly how the name, thank you, David. I see you on Zoom and I see your shining face with the background of our sanctuary. I encountered the name Darchei Noam when I came to Darchei Noam in 2002, newly married. And what I loved about it was the name. We were meeting in the basement, but the name went far beyond that. I was used to synagogues with a name called Beit something, which is quite static. It is a house, it is a place. But Darchei Noam were the ways of gentleness and of peace. We sing it every time we put the Torah away. It is the way, Darchei Noam, the way somebody feels when they come into our building, and we try to embody this name. It is the name that we take on the street, into the grocery store, into the mosque, into the churches, into the house of those who need to be visited, towards the lonely and towards the sick, and towards the bride and groom. That is Darchei Noam. That is our way. It is the name we gave to ourselves and that we continue to embody. And we didn't stop with that. We took it onto Zoom. And people find us when they're looking for us because of our name. Darchei Noam is the way of being in the world. It is not quantifiable. It is experiential. And it is the way towards the human heart. Throughout the year, we both cried when the pearls were made, because treasure is made in the depth of our despair. And we were there for one another, and we're committed to continue to be. And we laughed, because our humor, our Jewish humor, our human humor, and our Darchei Noam particular humor with inside language that signifies a family, a community. It is experiential, and it is a way into the human heart.